Alright, so I finally want to make this video, which I've been, kind of promising for the last several videos I've done. Where it's like, oh, I want to make an Elden Ring video. Well, I feel like now is a good time to make it. In part because of the recently released Demon Souls news, as well as what most likely seems like the end of Sekiro content, and then finally FromSoft acknowledging the development and like the community's enthusiasm of Elden Ring. I'm going to divide this video up into two parts. The first part is going to be where the hell has this game been? Like, why did we hear about it a year ago and then have heard nothing for like the next 500 days? And the second part, I'm going to do a little bit of speculation on what I think is going to be like a major part of the game. And I'm going to be talking about all of this while I play clips of me doing invasions in the Painted World, because I think this is like FromSoft's little Easter egg that they always put in their previous games about what's to come in their next games. Again, just speculation, but I have a pretty strong feeling that a lot of the Painted World, and especially like the Snowfield, are big hints as to stuff that we might see in Elden Ring. Alright, so first things first. Where the hell is Elden Ring? Why did they announce this game with a cinematic trailer that typically follows with, an interview, a couple of months of like, letting the hype build and maybe tweeting about shit here and there, and then a gameplay trailer, and then like the game comes out, and that's all within like around like a 6-month period. That's pretty typical of what FromSoft does and how they release their games. But for Elden Ring, we've pretty much just gotten that one trailer, the one interview with Miyazaki, and then a whole lot of silence. And we've gotten confirmation here and there that they're still working on the game. So all those like, the game's been canceled, like, those memes don't really have any like basis. It's just like a coping mechanism, I guess, for a lack of news. But that's just kind of where like From Software's fan base is at right now. We're pretty spoiled. We got like back-to-back games practically for like 10 years. And we only ever had to wait like a year and then there'd be a new From game. And then that game's life cycle would have DLC, and then we get like another From game a year after that. But now that we had to wait a little bit of a while, everyone just loses their minds and assumes the game is canceled. It's like a little bit pathetic. Like, imagine if you're like a Starfield fan. That game basically got one like loading screen of information. It got a title card, and they probably won't get any information at all until like sometime in 2021. I would guess like June, just based on how Bethesda works. But From fans can't wait more than a year, apparently. Another like meme-ish kind of reason I hear parroted a lot as to why we haven't heard anything about Elden Ring is because George R.R. Martin is working on it, and since he's like never finished his Game of Thrones series, he's never going to finish this game either. And I know most of the people who say that don't really mean it, but just like I'm sure there are some people who say it and actually do believe it, so I just wanted to clarify that like not only is that false, but like we've known that's been false for like a year now. That essentially when Miyazaki did that first interview way back in June of 2019, he kind of explicitly stated that Martin's end of the project has been done for a while now. And I remember when the last episode of the final season of Game of Thrones came out, which was a disaster, by the way. When that came out, Martin released a blog post talking about what he's been doing instead of writing his books. And one of the things he said was he consulted on a video game out of Japan. Now, consulted means something much smaller than what the marketing material for Elden Ring implies. They called it like a collaboration between Miyazaki and Martin, which is true, but what Martin's really written is the equivalent to like the opening cutscene of Dark Souls 1. Like everything that's taken place in the world of Elden Ring, Martin like wrote the mythos of that world, and then Miyazaki is going to do whatever he wants with the rest of the plot. This is not some collaboration where they're bouncing ideas off of each other as development continues, and the reason why development is being held up is because Martin has writer's block, or that Martin didn't like the character design of a particular boss, so he's making the designers go back to the drawing board. It's also been on record that Martin doesn't really play video games. And I remember there was some Redditor who went to a book signing of his way back before COVID happened, and you could still go to book signings. And he asked him about it, and he said that Miyazaki kind of just came over to his house with like a bunch of translators, and they like sat around for like many hours and just talked over like their thoughts on this cool world idea. I spent a little too much time talking about this already, but just so we're clear, the game's not being held up by Martin's inability to finish his books or finish the writing for this game. Look, the real reason why we haven't heard anything in a year is because this game very clearly got delayed. And there's two parts to me saying very clearly. On one hand, it's very, very easy to delay a game that has no announced release date. They definitely have a target release date, but there's a reason why FromSoft and another company like Bethesda Studios don't announce their release dates until like only a couple months before the release date itself. And that is because you can't get any bad press for delaying a game when nothing's been announced. Just look at how much bad press CD Projekt Red is currently getting for delaying their game 3 times. Same with Naughty Dog delaying The Last of Us 2. No one likes a game delay. There's a lot of bad connotations that come with a game delay, but just continued development on a game that's still in the works gets no press, and when you're ready to announce your release date, you control the entire narrative, which is exactly what Bethesda Studios does. It's exactly what FromSoft is going to do and has done in the past with their games. The other reason I could say with some degree of confidence that Elden Ring has been delayed is because back in late May of 2019, Jason Schreier, who's one of the most reliable reporters in the gaming industry, responded to a user on Twitter that was asking about a couple questions about some games, one of which was Elden Ring, and Schreier confirmed that these were all going to come out in 2020. But then 2020 actually happened. I guess Jason Schreier's statement that 2020 would be wild was correct in a totally different way. But COVID happened. All these companies ended up having to go work from home. And as a result, all of these games got delayed. A couple days ago, Schreier confirmed this, responding to a guy specifically asking about Elden Ring. But he confirmed this for all these other games that we knew also got delayed. And look, this is just kind of the reality of working from home during COVID. Working from home is nice. It's nice that development can continue. There are several other industries, like movies and TV shows, that had to stop production entirely because filming wasn't done, and that needs to all be done in person, whereas game development can be done remote. However, it's a lot less efficient that way. And I'm sure other people have their own personal exceptions, but the fact that every single game on that list got delayed is pretty indicative that working from home is nowhere near as efficient. I've been working from home for my game studio, and that probably resulted in about a month delay on the project that we're working on. Now, we're not a very big team, so I can only imagine the delay that much larger teams had to implement in order to get their product out on time. Now, we likely know there's been a delay due to the work from home reasons. I suspect that there is also likely a sort of overhaul that might have happened to the game, like it's happened a lot for past FromSoft games. Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3 all had major overhauls to their story and main arc of the game, really significant stuff, either halfway through the project or with a year left in the project. For example, Dark Souls 2 had a radically different plot with a much bigger focus on time travel. Bloodborne's entire plot was drastically overhauled even the last 6 months before launch, based on this Tokyo Game Show build that they had, in which Lawrence isn't the founder of the Healing Church, he's your friend that you came to Yharnam to find. And Dark Souls 3 had a significant overhaul about a year or so before launch, in which Pontiff Sullivan's entire arc was totally rewritten because he was supposed to be the final boss that you fight in Dark Firelink, and he was supposed to be this Dark Lord, and instead we get this scheming wizard. And the penultimate boss that's supposed to be at the top of Lothric Castle, where we now fight Lothric and Lorien, was supposed to be this fight with Koth, the primordial serpent. FromSoft kind of changes things pretty radically within the last like year or two of development for their games in an almost like frightening way. You're like, wow, that's totally different than what we got. And they're doing these things for good reason. They're not just like willy-nilly like rewriting the story at the last second because they think it'd be fun. They have probably like game-related issues with why they can't do certain things. But even if this isn't an overhaul, even if this is just like we want to refine certain aspects of the game, that's a really good thing. Think of all the aspects that would have made like for more interesting content had FromSoft had a little bit more time to finish whatever it was. Stuff like Lost Izalith and Demon Ruins from Dark Souls 1 come to mind. Stuff like the Earthen Peak elevator to Iron Keep that, you know, is an elevator that goes straight up into the sky and then you end up in the center of a volcano. There's the Profane Capital in Dark Souls 3, and almost like everything surrounding the Profane Capital seems like kind of unfinished. There seems like there's a lot more to that area that we just never see. And then there's like Dragonrot from Sekiro, which seems really gimped. Like it seemed like they had this idea for a way to implement world tendency, like in Demon Souls, where every time you die, the world becomes harder in a way. And I think through Dragonrot, like main characters or like NPCs were supposed to die because they got Dragonrot for too long and you died too much. And you know, this is your punishment for being bad. But I think what we ended up with was just kind of this minor annoyance where you could find the means to cure Dragonrot throughout the game. You could do it really quite a lot if you wanted to. But there was never really that much of a reason to make sure none of your NPCs had Dragonrot. You know, maybe if you wanted to buy some items, but I didn't buy a whole lot of items when I played Sekiro. So it just kind of seemed like this giant wasted mechanic that if they had a little bit more time, I felt like they could have really done something with, instead of just keeping it in for what felt like lore reasons. Now, here's some wilder speculation for you. A lot of developers, I think, would just keep delaying their game forever. Not really, but like, you know, they'd keep delaying it so they could iron out all the aspects of the game they wanted to finish. That's really not possible because we don't have infinite resources. We don't have infinite time to work on the games that we love. And a big reason you have to push up deadlines and, you know, cut parts of your project are because, you know, your publisher is breathing down your neck and being like, hey, you know, that game's got to hit this date because this is all the funding that we're going to give you. And in most situations, the publisher is like the more powerful entity, you know, because they are controlling your marketing, they're distributing your game, and they provide a significant amount of funding. But what if you were insanely valuable to your publisher, like FromSoft is to Bandai Namco? See, when FromSoft made Sekiro, they had that game published through Activision. And I had some issues with how Activision, you know, did some of the localization, especially the voice acting for the English version. I know that it gets a lot of hate, and I don't think it deserves all the hate that it gets, but it's also not good, and it's also not as good as what Bandai Namco has done for the English version of, let's say, Dark Souls or Bloodborne, which all have phenomenal voice acting. Anyways, that's all beside my point. Sekiro was published by Activision, which I kind of interpret that as FromSoft going around and saying, like, look, we can get whoever we want to publish our games. It doesn't have to be you, Bandai. Like, Sekiro sold 5 million copies, and Activision got a cut of that, because that's what publishers do. It was also really interesting to me that when Miyazaki was asked about why he chose Activision, he said that they gave him pretty much total creative control and helped him with certain things. Like, they came up with the idea to call it Shadows Die Twice, whereas he just kind of wanted to name it Sekiro. But the main takeaway is that Miyazaki felt like he had total creative control and he could kind of just do whatever he wanted to do. So now they're returning to Bandai as they're going to publish Elden Ring. But this time, FromSoft just showed that they can go to whoever they want and get their game published with full creative control if that's what they want. And hey, maybe they can delay their game and refine the areas of the game they think are a little bit rough if they want to, and I think Bandai will just let them. FromSoft is kind of Bandai's like golden goose now. They've tried to replicate it with stuff like Code Vein, and like there's another anime-like Souls game coming out. So they're clearly trying to target that specific audience. But at the end of the day, FromSoft is FromSoft. And Bandai stands to like make the most money if FromSoft does well, and FromSoft gets what they want. This is also a game that is much more high profile than other games they made in the past. They just came off of winning Game of the Year with Sekiro, and now they have the writer to an extremely popular IP writing for their game. Quote unquote writing. In his words, he's consulting, but the marketing is going to say he's, collaborating. This is huge for FromSoft, and which means it's huge for Bandai, which means they're going to let them hone and refine their game until they feel like it's ready. And we should be okay with that. If there's any studio I have a ton of faith in, is FromSoft. They have basically a decade of making absolutely incredible games. With 0 duds, I refuse to hear any sort of Dark Souls 2 slander. If you insult Dark Souls 2 in the comments of this video, I will make like a 10-hour long in defense of Dark Souls 2 video series, because that really is something that deserves to be talked about for 10 hours. Holy shit. But hey, there is some pretty good news. Or I struggle to call it news because it's unverified. But on the site Reset Era, which has a lot of leakers on it, there was a poll about which game is coming out in 2021, and on there was Elden Ring. And one of the users said oh, definitely Elden Ring. That particular user was a fairly reputable leaker who had correctly predicted that Sekiro would have no DLC, which seems far too specific to be, just a lucky guess. And then another user had who was fairly reputable, who has a pretty big social media presence called Rebellion, confirmed that their sources are really good. Now, this is not 100% news that's oh, it's for sure going to be in 2021. But I'd say that's about as good as we're going to get right now until we hear it directly from software or Jason Schreier. When that Reset Era user had been verified by Rebellion back in April, they had said early 2021 for Elden Ring. So that might still be the case. It might have been pushed back further due to COVID delays or whatever like that. But I'd be fairly surprised if we didn't see anything about it at the upcoming Game Awards on December 10th. According to another reputable leaker named Omnipotent, who I'll go into a little bit more a little later in this video, they had said that Elden Ring is supposed to be at last year's The Game Awards, which they won Game of the Year at, which would have made perfect sense. I remember watching that and seeing Miyazaki in the crowd. Hell, he was in the front row, and I was just so convinced oh, they're definitely going to show something. And the whole show goes by, and they never show anything about From Software or Elden Ring. And the very last award, Sekiro wins Game of the Year. Miyazaki gets up on stage, gives his speech about, thank you for playing our game. And I was all right, now show it to us. And he's all right, goodbye. And they're that's the show. Goodbye, everyone. That killed part of my soul. But anyways, this leaker on Reset Era had said it was supposed to be there in 2019. It's kind of weird that they're that far off in terms of more info on the game, but ultimately we really don't know the extent of the delays. They could have been pretty significant. So we'll see what this all leads to. The game isn't canceled. Just have a little patience. Alright, now if you thought that last part was all wild speculation and conjecture, just wait to this next part. I kind of want to talk about what I think we're going to see in Elden Ring. Not just oh, it's going to be FromSoft's open world, their first attempt at that. But more so, what's the focus of this game in terms of combat? So for purposes of brevity, I'm just going to start with when FromSoft started to try to change their formula for how combat worked. And so in Dark Souls 2, everything was based on being very, very precise with everything that you do. You have to roll precisely because you have less iframes. You have to pick the perfect window to heal because your Estus takes forever to chug for some reason. And you have to roll at exactly the right times because enemies' attacks track way longer than they did in the last game. Now, Bloodborne comes around and says fuck shields, fuck how weapons work. We're going to, give you a million different moves that aren't R1. Now you're going to quick step instead of roll when an enemy tries to attack you. And hey, if you get hit, like you do a lot in these games, your first instinct isn't to play incredibly passively so you can get the perfect opportunity to heal. Because of the rally system, if you get hit, you're kind of encouraged to like stand in there and get that health back. It's like playing aggressively and precisely without playing passively. That's just kind of like their MO in Bloodborne, is to get rid of all passivity, which I think was a great initiative. But then unfortunately we have Dark Souls 3, which, because it's a Souls game, weapons have to work a certain way, healing has to work a certain way. We kind of have to take all these steps back because FromSoft has to go back and make a Dark Souls game that has certain tenets of how combat works in those. So they kind of had to take this step back. They tried to maintain the pace of Bloodborne, but it didn't quite mesh with like the Dark Souls combat system, in my opinion. But then we got Sekiro, and once again they're trying to get rid of all passivity. So if you back away from a boss that you're fighting, they regain their posture, and the only way to maintain the flow to combat in order to fill up your boss's like posture bar so that you can like get the death blow on them, you have to keep fighting even when you get hit. Sometimes like you can still stand in there and you play risky because you can die at any second, but that's also okay because you can resurrect. So they put in like these kind of like checks to make sure that you're not just like hitting them and backing up and hitting them and backing up. They're like, okay, we want you to fight, we want you to stand in there. And the biggest thing for me, at least, was that they wanted you to diagnose attacks. It was no longer like I see attack and I dodge. It was now like I see attack and like, okay, what are they doing? Are they like doing a sweep attack? Okay, I'm gonna jump on their head and kick them in the face. Are they doing a thrust attack? Okay, I'm gonna like Makiri counter them. Or are they doing a grab attack? I'm gonna dodge. Or if they're just doing a regular attack, I'm going to parry. So what's Elden Ring's like MO gonna be? I know they're gonna wanna probably prioritize us being aggressive. They are probably going to have us diagnose a few attacks and figure out what we want to do with those. But they just did sword fighting, and they did like knights fighting each other by rolling, I guess. I think their next big mountain to climb is going to be mounted combat. And here's why. In the only cinematic trailer that we have, we see this guy like charging and like plunging his spear into some other enemy. But we only see this guy from the waist up, and he's kind of just like flying at the guy, right? Someone on, I think it was Reset Era again, like got a freeze frame from the trailer and outlined this little part of the top of his head of like what looks like horse armor, which would explain how he's traveling. He's not flying, he's riding on a horse, he's charging at something on a horse. Well, it doesn't have to be a horse, it can be any sort of mount, but I think that's kind of my point here. And I think there's a very good reason why they cropped out that part of the trailer and just showed like the tip of his spear and then the top half of his body. I think they kind of wanted to keep that as a bit of a reveal for when they do gameplay. And like the gameplay trailer and like a walkthrough of like a tiny slice of a level. The usual kind of thing that they do when they reveal parts of the game. The very reputable leaker that I mentioned earlier, named Omnipotent, I don't put a lot of faith into a lot of the things they say. I think it's like pretty good information, but they try to keep it pretty vague, just so they're not spoiling anything. But they said like, oh, you'll have the option to fight enemies on horseback. And I just think there's no way that FromSoft lets like mounted combat be what it is in other open world games. I'm thinking of like Ubisoft, like Assassin's Creed games with horse combat, and like Skyrim's horse combat, which are all terrible. They are such an afterthought of the combat system, where even though most of those games don't have that great of combat in the first place, the mounted combat is like so much more of a letdown, because pretty much all you can do those games is like swing your sword from the horse, but the hitboxes on it are bad, and you can like fire arrows from it, but it's a little bit hard to control both your horse and the player and where you're aiming. If anyone can take a combat system that has never been that good and make it into something that people think is like revolutionary or incredible or just very good, I think it can be FromSoft. They already did that with Sekiro. I think it would be awesome if we finally got a game where horse-mounted combat really felt like powerful or fast, or like what like cavalry is supposed to be. I would really love to know if you guys have any ideas of games that do horse combat right, or just mounted combat in general right, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. And given the fact that I think we know for a fact that there's going to be horses in the game to get around the giant map, that it's supposed to be like FromSoft's biggest game, I think there's a very good chance that we're going to be able to fight enemies in a way that feels challenging and rewarding, as is like FromSoft style, while also like traversing this big open world. We also know that FromSoft loves to hide little Easter eggs of what their next game is going to be about within their most recent titles. In Bloodborne, they had Yamamura, who was a dude roaming around the DLC that wore like Sekiro-like clothing and also used a katana. Then we had like the Swordmaster in Dark Souls 3, who was outside Firelink Shrine, who also looked kind of like Sekiro except with tattered clothes, and he also had a katana. So we've already obviously seen something that hints at Elden Ring, and I think one thing that kind of backs up my earlier theory was we have Gyobu, who is a mounted combat fight, right? You're fighting a dude on a horse using a spear. That might be a bit of a reach, but it kind of fits in with my theory. It's kind of backed up by that, so I'll take it. But I also think a large portion of the painted world of Aaaaannnddd in Dark Souls 3's DLC is like makes reference to at least some stuff that's going to be in Elden Ring. Reset Era leaker, I've mentioned a couple times now, Omnipotent, basically confirmed that there's going to be lots of wolves in the game. People ask like what kind of animals are going to be there, and he's like, wolves, like in exclamation points. And that very first section in the snowfield in Aaaaannnddd is like pretty wide open and filled with wolves, which to me kind of points that that might be some sort of vague reference to a game that's going to have lots of wolves in it. I also think the Millwood Knights might be another sort of reference. They are very clearly like derived from like Norse mythology. They like worship this big tree. But also because when the first leaks for Elden Ring came out, back when it was like referred to as like Great Rune, and it was supposed to be like this Norse-inspired Dark Souls game essentially, I think there's probably good reason for that. They have now kind of come back and said, well, it's not a Norse-inspired game, but I think there's definitely some influence in there from it, and I think these like Norse-inspired Viking knights from the Aaaaannnddd DLC could be some sort of reference to that. The timelines also match up in that regard. In the interview that Miyazaki did with Xbox upon Elden Ring's announcement, they said they started working on this right as development of the Ring City came to a close. So it wouldn't surprise me if they put a reference into a game that hadn't been fully yet developed in the previous DLC, which was Aaaaannnddd. None of this is extremely solid information, obviously. I'm just like speculating based on the information that we have, which is not a lot. But I have enjoyed just like thinking about it. It's kind of like building this hype. And I hope we don't overhype it for ourselves. I hope we don't have these like lofty and ridiculous expectations about what this game is going to be. Because at the end of the day, it is an evolution of Dark Souls. It's going to be some known quantity to us. If any developer has been insanely consistent over the last decade, it's been From Software, so I have a lot of faith in them, but at the same time, I don't want to be, already crowning this game of the year the moment we see any sort of gameplay. I just really think it's important to like temper one's expectations for things in general. But I don't think I have too much more to say on this topic. I will say thank you, if you're still watching, for hearing out my wild curiosity on this topic. But I just want a new game to play. Dark Souls 3 has been out for quite a while. I feel like we've really extracted all that we can from it. Invasions are still fun. I really still like invasions, but I just want something a little bit new. I've been playing some different games here and there that are pretty fun, but I still always come back to invading in Dark Souls 3. I know some of you are hyped for Demon Souls, and that's awesome for you. It looks like a really good game, and I heard it's going to have PvP, which would also be really fun. Unfortunately, I just really can't justify buying an entire full-price console for one game that's really just a remake of a 10-year-old game. I really don't want to run down Bluepoint or the job that, like, they're doing on this Demon's Souls remake, but I just don't want to buy a console just to play one game. You know, if there's another, if Elden Ring turns out to be a Sony exclusive, you know, then I will buy the console. I'll be mad about it, but I'll still buy it. So the wait for us PC and Xbox players will have to be a good deal longer. But that's okay, because I think this game is coming a little bit sooner than a lot of people think. But hey, I'm happy being patient. So that's all from me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.